We've plated the enchilada casserole topped with a creamy cilantro sauce. I'm going to have no more time. This week's theme is God's faithfulness. Today we're going to be making a plant-based enchilada casserole. I like making this casserole dish because it's a lot easier to put together when you get home from work at the end of a day. Instead of rolling the individual enchiladas, you layer it sort of lasagna style. So it's a great way to get a really delicious, nourishing meal on the table in half the time. This enchilada recipe calls for 3 cups of enchilada sauce. Now, you can purchase pre-made enchilada sauce at the store, but it's really easy to make. So I wanted to go ahead and show you how to make a homemade enchilada sauce really quick and really easy. So I'm going to go ahead and heat 3 tablespoons of oil. You can use any kind of oil, a mild oil or an olive oil. I'm going to go ahead and let that get warmed up. We're going to make a roux. So as soon as that oil gets warmed up, we're going to go ahead and add the flour and our spices, the tomato sauce, and just simmer. I'm using a garbanzo flour, but you can use any type of all-purpose flour. I'm using that so it's gluten-free. I'm going to go ahead and give it a quick whisk and lower the heat to medium. I'm going to cook off some of the flour taste. I'm going to go ahead and add some spices now. I've got 1.5 teaspoons of ground cumin, half teaspoon oregano, 1/4 teaspoon salt, an 1/8 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/4 teaspoon of ground cayenne pepper. I'm going to go ahead and whisk those in. I'm also going to add a tablespoon of chipotle chili sauce. You can use chipotle, you can use chili powder, but I like the richness of a chipotle sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and add 1 tablespoon of that in with my seasonings. And I'm going to go ahead and add 1.5 cups of water. And then I'm going to add my tomato sauce. I'm going to bring this to a simmer. And I'm going to cook over a medium heat till it's thickened, about 5 to 7 minutes. This week's gospel is actually one of my favorites, the parable of the fig tree. Maybe because I've been the beneficiary of a very patient gardener. I've also been that patient gardener, both theoretically and in actuality. The time of Jesus was an agrarian society, which is just a fancy word for they were farmers. And most of them couldn't afford to give space in their field to plants that weren't yielding harvest. They just didn't have that luxury. Every inch had to produce. But in this story of the fig tree, the gardener begged the landowner to give it 1 more year, and he would nurture this fig tree. and give it everything it needed to bear fruit. Jesus is really showing us the grace of the Father. Everything that he pours within us to nourish us, to bear fruit. We're always worth salvaging. God never gives up on any of us, ever. This recipe calls for a few toppings, and one of them is a creamy cilantro sauce. So I'm going to show you a couple secrets about making a cream sauce without any dairy products. First, this recipe calls for a half a cup of cashews that are soaked overnight. But if you haven't soaked them overnight and decide you want to have the cilantro sauce the next day, an easy way to get that softened cashews is just to put them in a little bit of water and to have them simmer on medium on the stove for a little bit. And they'll soften up enough to be able to come nice and creamy in the food processor when we start to blend. I'm also going to use, I'm going to dice up a jalapeno. Now, if you don't like it really, really spicy, you're going to want to de-seed and devein it. So I'm going to leave that up to your discretion, how much spice you want. You can leave a few seeds in for good measure. And this will get diced up and put in the food processor. We're going to put everything in the food processor and blend it up. And it'll make a beautiful, rich, creamy cilantro sauce for the top of our enchiladas. Calls for 1.5 juice from limes. It calls for the juice from 1.5 limes. Try that again. It also calls for a half a cup of filtered water and about half a teaspoon of salt. I like to use adobe. It's got a little bit of salt, pepper, and turmeric, so it gives it a nice seasoned blend. I'm also going to go ahead and use these cashews. I'm going to strain them. I'm going to grab the cilantro. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add the cashews to my blender. And I've got a whole bunch of cilantro, so it calls for about half the bunch. So I'm going to go ahead and separate just a little bit of it out. It calls for stems and all, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in my food processor. I'm going to go ahead and give it a whirl. I can share a very recent parable of my own. When my mom passed away, a dear friend of mine sent a beautiful peace lily. If you know anything about plants, the peace lily in particular can bear a significant amount of neglect without dying. I know that for a fact. It was blooming when she sent it, but it had yet to bloom again. I could have easily just been the landowner and thought, well, I'm just going to get rid of this plant because it's certainly not bearing fruit. I'm not wasting any more care on this plant, right? But a few days ago, I saw a white spiral raising out of the leaves. That white spiral means a flower. Not only one, but I saw two. Had I given up on that plant, I would have missed those flowers. This flowering as I approach the 4th year of my mom's passing. It's grace. It's grace personified. That grace reminding us that God never gives up on us. Ever. If I had given up on that plant, I would not be able to enjoy these beautiful blooms. God wants to delight in us too. Can you be open to his nourishment and care that he offers to you? This is the time where it's nice to have an extra pair of hands in the kitchen, somebody helping to dice and slice. Or you can always start dicing in the morning. If you have some extra time in the morning, you can put your dice stuff in a baggie or in plasticware and just leave it in the fridge till you get home. So there's also, you can also purchase vegetables that are already diced for you. It's a little bit more expensive, but it depends if you want to use it for convenience. That's a good way to go also. This one wanted to be stubborn with the skin coming off. As I stated last time, I always save my vegetable scraps and I put them in a gallon baggie in the freezer. So when I get that gallon baggie full, I fill up a big stock pot with water and I dump in the frozen vegetables and some seasonings and whatever herbs I have laying around, and it makes a beautiful seasoned vegetable stock. So I don't have to spend the money on the stock at the store. I can usually cool them down and I'll put them in plastic containers in the freezer, and I'll take them out when I'm ready to cook soup or sauces, and this way I have homemade vegetable stock. I've got my onion and pepper diced up, so I'm going to go ahead and get them started. I've got a tablespoon of olive oil. I'm going to let it heat up just a little bit. We're going to want to cook the onion and the pepper down about 5-6 minutes. The wonderful thing about whole food plant-based foods are that a lot of the international cuisine is plant-based. So when I started eating more whole foods, I really got to take a tour around the world of all these beautiful, wonderful, delicious flavors from different parts of the world, with Mexican cuisine and Indian cooking and Asian and Thai and Vietnamese. So eating more whole food plant-based really opens up the world to all the different cuisine and the delicious flavors that you get to experience by all these different cuisines from around the world. While that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and take this sweet potato and I'm going to go ahead and get some nice pieces of the sweet potato. I like to use the peeler, this, what is this called? Grater. I like to use the grater. I like to use the grater because this way the sweet potato ends up cooking down pretty fast. So I've used about half of a medium potato here. I'm probably going to slice the whole thing. But I want to make sure when you get down close, go ahead and please use your safety blade, because I have definitely cut myself on a mandolin. So it's definitely, you want to definitely use the protection. while you're slicing. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of these chipotle peppers. And I'm going to let those cook down. By adding the peppers, we don't really have to add much more seasoning. These peppers are going to give it a nice kick when we put all of our tomatoes and the rest of the beans together for our filling for our enchilada recipe. I'm going to add my sweet potatoes now. I have a can of diced tomatoes and green chilies, and a can of diced tomatoes. I'm going to add about 3/4 of a cup of the enchilada sauce. I'm going to go ahead and add the beans. I've got a can of black beans, and I've got a can of Great Northern beans. So we've got the onions, the peppers, I've got a can of diced tomatoes. I've also got a can of diced tomatoes and green chilies. I've got a couple of chipotle peppers in there, and we're just going to let this simmer till a little bit of that liquid cooks off. Looking good. We've also got the sweet potato in there, and because we grated it, it cooks up nice and fast, so we don't have to wait too long for this filling to be cooked. It's time to assemble our enchilada casserole. I like to use corn tortillas so that it's gluten-free. So we're going to be assembling this sort of like a lasagna. So you're going to have a 9 by 13 inch pan. I'm going to take a little bit of cooking spray so that it doesn't stick. So I'm just going to start layering the casserole with sauces and the filling and the tortillas. So I've gone ahead and layered my corn tortillas first over the sauce. Now I have my vegetable mix in. I'm going to go ahead and put some vegan cheese in. These are either nut-based or soy-based, and you'd be surprised how close to real cheese they taste, especially when you're using them in a dish. You can hardly tell. These plant-based cheeses have come a long way over the years, and they are quite delicious. I'm going to go ahead and add another layer of the vegetables, saving a little bit for the very top. You want to top off your enchilada casserole with a little bit of the vegetables. There are recipes that you can find online for plant-based queso that you can use instead of this cheese or in addition to. But I thought if you're going to make one sauce, it's a little bit easier to make the enchilada and then use the store-bought cheese. But you could always buy enchilada sauce and then use homemade queso sauce. So you can always either substitute the homemade queso with cheese, or you can buy enchilada or homemade enchilada. A lot of different options with this recipe. I just feel like the enchilada sauce is so quick and easy to make. It's kind of a no-brainer to make that one. So we're going to go ahead and put on our last layer of the tortillas. Yeah, you want to go ahead and finish up the sauce on top. And again, we're going to put another layer of the vegetables. And I've already preheated the oven to 350. So it really will just take a few minutes warming up in the oven. Since it's already mostly cooked, it just will kind of all melt together and have that wonderful enchilada flavor. You want to make sure that you use all of your sauce. because those enchiladas will absorb a lot of that sauce. So go ahead and load up the rest of that sauce on top. You're going to be covering this. And you're going to bake for about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to top it with the last bit of the cheese here. So this is going to go ahead and get covered. We're going to put it in a 350-degree oven for 20 minutes. We're going to remove the foil and bake uncovered for another 10. And then we're going to remove and let it cool for at least about 5 minutes. And then we can top it with our desired toppings, slice it into pieces, and enjoy. We've taken the enchilada casserole out of the oven, and we'll let it cool for about 5 minutes before we cut it. We'll top it with some toppings and our creamy cilantro sauce, and it'll be ready to eat. All right.
Good?
Yeah. So I'm just going to move it. We've plated the enchilada casserole, topped it with the creamy cilantro dressing. It's a really delicious meal that's very hearty and filling. You can add a side salad if you'd like, but it literally is a meal in itself. Add this to your repertoire for a plant-based meal that really is filling and hearty and delicious.